We're going to bring in Jeremy Rosenthal, criminal defense attorney. Jeremy, always nice to see you on Live Now from Fox.
Good morning, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I want to get to this because yesterday, very explosive testimony with Cassie Ventura's mom. We then heard from one of the male escorts. Now we're getting into the more expert testimony, which can often be a little bit drier, but also really hammer the points home that the prosecution and the defense want to make. Let's start with the person on the stand right now, this clinical psychologist who is talking about trauma bonds, etc. What is the prosecution trying to point to when it comes to the charges against Sean Diddy Combs?
What they're trying to do with Dr. Hughes is they're trying to shore up a lot of loose ends, and they're trying to fortify Cassie Ventura's testimony through an expert witness. A lot of times when you're prosecuting, your case is only as strong as your weakest link, and your weakest link is going to be the human being, the vulnerable, fragile, oftentimes victimized human being who has to go on the witness stand and face cross-examination. They may not remember things. They may have motive or incentive to act a certain way. And what the prosecution will do is they'll call an expert in often cases, and that person will fortify the testimony, explain, here's why this person might say this, here's why this person might say that. Dr. Hughes is what's called a blind expert, meaning she has intentionally not learned any of the facts of this case, which sort of also kind of walls her off from certain cross-examination things. But the weak points there are that she's going to be vulnerable to certain things that she has to assume by virtue of not really getting into the facts. But we do see this. This is a very common tactic prosecutors use to fortify what a victim is testifying about.
So, yeah, it's interesting because you were mentioning something very important, considering that she is giving blind testimony. So she doesn't know the details of the facts. And I think a lot of people wonder, OK, so when does the prosecution reach out to an expert saying, hey, look, we want you on a certain case. Don't read or don't, figure out any of the specific details. How does that work?
Well, they don't. It's sort of understood. They don't tell the expert not to do anything. They just don't provide them any information for that. And then that way the expert can go up there and just sort of opine. And it's a very sort of wash, rinse, repeat process. You see it in a lot of child abuse cases. You see it in a lot of domestic violence cases. And what this expert will do is they will, in some instances in state court, they will go literally from courtroom to courtroom. And they may testify 2 to 3 times per week. And it's a vulnerability if the defense can get there. If the defense can ask questions like, okay, so why didn't you look into this case? Why didn't you try to study that? Why didn't you try to interview Miss Ventura? Why didn't you try to interview her mom? Why didn't you even look at the police report? So there are some built-in vulnerabilities there when you are going to go into a case and be somewhat blind. The rules assume when you call an expert witness that you're going to be talking about more highbrow psychological principles. Also, what that means is that the defense can say, okay, doctor, you're not going to look at the facts of this case. That's fine. Well, would you agree with this study that happened in 1993 where the opposite experts concluded something different? That's what this debate sort of turns into. But again, the prosecution is winning to some degree, at least on the issue of fortifying Miss Ventura's testimony and supplementing it, because their case is only as strong as the weakest link, and the weakest link is almost always going to be the human being that is the victim that they're calling to try to strengthen a lot of those inherent vulnerabilities that a victim or a complainant is going to have.
And we have a live stream going, Jeremy, and a lot of people, again, are very interested in understanding, that human aspect. Cassie chose they say, you know, to stay with Sean Diddy Combs, the psychologist talking about the trauma bond that makes them feel like they have no other option. When it comes, though, and we were mentioning domestic violence, that is not a charge, you know, that Sean Diddy Combs is facing. He's facing sex trafficking, you know, a number of other ones. What does this particular expert testimony, what is that going to point towards for the prosecution to make their case? Because it's not about domestic violence. It's not about sexual assault. These are higher level, you know, federal charges.
Ultimately, the prosecution's going to have to connect this to some broader things if they want to prove racketeering, if they want to prove some kind of conspiracy. And the micro moment of sort of what we're seeing is they're still not quite done with Miss Ventura. Obviously, they were concerned enough about Miss Ventura's testimony to try to call Dr. Hughes. If I'm the defense, I'm pointing out several things with this expert's testimony. What I'm saying is, listen, if we have a blind witness up here, she's sort of presuming guilt and not innocence. And you have to presume guilt because what she's testifying to is because Miss Ventura is a victim, therefore this, therefore she's a victim. So it is almost sort of circular logic. If you're the defense, you're really pointing to that saying, well, wait a minute here, you're saying she's the victim and that's your first point. Shouldn't that be what this all leads up to? Another sort of blind spot with these experts is that some of these thoughts and theories don't necessarily account for certain things such as drug abuse or mental health issues. And they also can sort of lack the understanding that sometimes, and as Diddy has done with his defense, these sort of things can be kind of mutual, right? That there can be this mutual disliking. But ultimately, to your point, Stephanie, I think you're correct. Ultimately, this has got to get somewhere bigger. It's got to get to some of these outward conspiracies and not be about Miss Ventura. Because if P. Diddy is guilty of domestic violence towards her, it doesn't prove these federal charges. Now, it gets the jury not to like him, and that's certainly part and parcel of an effective prosecution, whether we like that or not. But ultimately, you're correct, Stephanie. This has to get bigger, and we're going to have to see some witnesses that ultimately connect a few more dots than we're seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, as of now, and you know, I'd love to get your opinion on this. You know, we've been hearing from Cassie. I mean, just incredibly powerful, gripping, harrowing testimony. But again, what does that kind of point to? It certainly creates an emotion, I would imagine, in a juror and the jury. But, you know, the prosecution, as you know, has to go well beyond that when proving their case. When you're taking a look at the testimony that we have heard thus far, you know, where do you think the ball has fallen? Do you think that right now, you know, the defense seems to have a stronger case, or the prosecution? Again, this is 8 weeks long. Anything could happen in those 8 weeks. But at this point in time, day 8 of testimony, you know, what's your takeaway?
You're seeing everybody's strategy really start to take shape and develop. You're seeing the prosecution trying to lay the predicate that this man is an abuser, that these acts did occur, that there was sex abuse, that there was the transportation of people, that there was force, that there was intimidation. So you're starting to see sort of the groundwork form there from the prosecution and the government's standpoint. You're also sort of seeing from Diddy's standpoint, sort of the divide and conquer defense of, well, okay, maybe we're a bad guy. Maybe we did commit some of these things, but you've got to make this bigger. You've got to connect this at a larger level. Also, part of that is to sort of what you call in criminal court kissing the ugly baby or throwing the skunk on the table. That would be for Diddy and his team to kind of marry up to some of the bad facts. Okay, fine, maybe he is abusive. Okay, fine, maybe he wasn't very pleasant. Okay, fine, we're guilty of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we're not guilty of some of these more fabulous things that you're sort of alleging. So you are sort of seeing a lot of those, both of those theories really starting to congeal and to take shape. And I think you're just going to see more of that as this case goes on.
I just want to touch upon before we let you go, because I know that you have a very busy schedule. Everyone really kind of, I would imagine hoping to hear from Kid Cudi on the stand today. We were hearing from prosecutors that he's not going to appear any earlier than tomorrow. But obviously, he has a very key part in this. He had a relationship with Cassie. Prosecution is saying that, Combs was so upset by this relationship that he, said that he was going to firebomb Kid Cudi's vehicle. We hear that that's going to point to arson, but how key is that testimony going to be?
It's going to be key if it starts to sort of spider out into some of these broader conspiracy type things. And remember, when you're charging somebody with racketeering, they've got to agree to a criminal enterprise that is bigger than just themselves. That enterprise doesn't have to be P. Diddy's organization. It doesn't have to be necessarily a formal company or something like that. It can just be a handful of people who are engaging in moving people from one place to another, who are engaging in this type of intimidation. So when I'm watching that testimony, that's going to be what I'm looking for. Is this starting to spider out beyond not just Cassie Ventura, not just beyond her, but beyond some of the other people that are helping Diddy? Because it's not going to be the people that are victimized here that create this racketeering and create this conspiracy. It's going to be the people that are helping Diddy. That's what the conspiracy is. That's what the racketeering is. That's what makes these cases federal.
Yeah, and you kind of answer another question that a lot of people are wondering, Jeremy. This RICO, right? This is what we're continuing to hear about, the racketeering, and it has to do with an organization. It can't just be one individual. However, Diddy, I believe, was the only person named in this. So when you're talking about broadening it out, how does that work if he's the only one right now charged with that particular count?
The other co-conspirators don't have to be. They don't have to be indicted. They don't even have to be a co-conspirator, so to speak. They don't even have to be legally identified. It just has to be shown that you were a part of a broader group of people that were engaging in this organization or organized line of thinking, if you will. So those people could be government witnesses, or they could just be shown that, look, there was somebody else that was out there that was with you. If you're prosecuting somebody for robbing a bank and there's 3 or 4 people with you that are on video, we don't know who they are. We know that can be a conspiracy, right? We can see that, and the jury can infer that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody indicted, but they do have to point at some point to other people who are out there who are assisting. And now they're almost certainly going to say Diddy was the ringleader of that, right? That Diddy was the person that was sort of intimidating those people too. But it's got to be just more than him.
So interesting. And thank you for kind of laying that out, because I think, most of us are not legal experts, unlike yourself. And sometimes this is high level and we don't really understand exactly, what the thought process or what the procedure is. So, so many twists and turns, and obviously we're just at the very beginning of this. But is there anything in particular, Jeremy, that has really stood out or stuck with you as we continue to hear from these witnesses and continue to, see the sketches and, all of the twists and turns?
So far, the government has made a really, really concerted effort to show how abusive and unlikable P. Diddy is. That's a chunk of what they've got to do in this case. That's a chunk of what they have to prove, but it's not everything. So that part of it, I don't know that I would call that surprising, but they have certainly made a concerted effort. And I wouldn't necessarily expect to see somebody like Dr. Hughes come and testify, a blind witness, to try to really come and drive these things home. It's sort of killing a fly with an atom bomb, if you will. But that's what the government does, and this is a high-profile case for them. They certainly don't want to. They certainly don't want to blow it, and they certainly don't want to lose it. But anytime you're going to throw a blind witness on the stand again, you're going to be vulnerable in certain ways. Just a lot of the things that we've already covered. But just to, if there's anything out here that is really just sort of sticking out so far, it's that they are really, really, really hammering on P. Diddy, the individual. And I think that's going to be a broader part of what they ultimately do when they sort of say, and here's all the tentacles that Diddy has. And this is why it's racketeering. This is why it's trafficking. It's why it's all these greater things.
Yeah, maybe the alleged mastermind of sorts. Jeremy, as always, we appreciate you taking the time to join us on Live Now from Fox. My gosh, day 8, but we're potentially a week 8, into it. So no doubt we're going to speak with you again.
Thank you, Stephanie.